Hey everyone, welcome to our session. We're going to be talking about tools for efficiency, AppConfig and Jamf API. So just a quick disclaimer here. All right, my name is Matt Green. I'm the Systems Integration Coordinator for Lubbock Cooper ISD. We're a K-12 school district. We manage about 12,000 Apple devices ranging from Apple TVs to Mac OS, iPad OS, and iOS. And so we've got 12,000 of those guys, and so they keep us very busy, but it's a very fun job. This is my friend Garrett Smith. Fun story with him. He actually has come up through the ranks through our K-12 environment as a student tech. So when he was in high school, he actually got to join with our program and got to kind of get to learn the ropes for technology and learn different things through our program. And then he became part-time and then led up to full-time until just recently when he resigned his position and moved on to Texas Tech University. So Garrett's got a really cool story, and so I often attribute half of what I've built with our MDM to Garrett. So he's helped very much with that. All right, so we're going to be talking about two main things here, but just a quick, just kind of disclaimer. We're not going to be going really into like a deep dive with either of these, with AppConfig or Jamf API. So this is more of kind of my friend just kind of put it as like an awareness, something that we found, two tools that we found very helpful in our careers as MDM admins. And so things that we wish that we would have known when we first started, or maybe you're 2 and 3 years into this and you're just learning about it again. And so these are two things that we found very useful. So the first part, which is what I'm going to be covering, is over AppConfig. So what is AppConfig? I'm going to give an example and a use case for AppConfig, as well as how to use AppConfig. The next part, which is going to be Garrett, is what we're going to cover for the Jamf Pro API. He's going to go over a little bit detailed version of what the Jamf Pro API is, some examples and use cases that we've used in our environment, which we use almost daily, whether it's through products that we have downloaded from the marketplace, or maybe it's a script that we've written ourselves. And so he's going to go into some of those examples and use cases and how you can get started with the Jamf API as well. All right, so this first part is going to be over managed app configuration. So what is AppConfig? So managed app configuration, also known as AppConfig, was first introduced with iOS 7. And so it's been out for a while, but a lot of admins may not know about it, and a lot of developers still don't know about it. And this is kind of one thing that we wanted to bring to the attention, bring to the forefront, is AppConfig, because the use cases of it are tremendous. But it basically allows MDM admins to specify settings for apps as they're deployed. Developers can also implement AppConfig into their app to allow organizations to customize their apps without repackaging. So what does that mean? Basically, as an MDM admin, I can specify some preset settings into the app so that it's customized to our organization itself, or down to the user even. And as a developer, what that means is that I can build an app, I can package that app kind of generically, and then I can attach AppConfig, which I'm going to get into here in just a minute, to basically allow users, MDM admins, organizations to customize that generic app specific to their use case. So I've also linked in this slides presentation, which will be available at the end of our presentation, by the way. There's a link at the bottom of this one for Apple's documentation. That documentation, unfortunately, goes all the way back to iOS 7, so it hasn't really been touched since it was first released, unfortunately, but there is definitely some things that you can learn to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of how AppConfig works, as well as some things that you can Google as well. So how does AppConfig work? AppConfig uses XML key value pairs to basically specify settings for MDM admins on how an app is going to work. So what it does is it takes a dictionary or plist, and you input XML through key and values. And so basically what you can do is set a key to where the developer has built in something like a handle or something like they've built a variable into their app that reads that key and then looks at the value that's been specified. So I'm going to cover this a little bit more in detail on the next slides. Using AppConfig, you can also, like I said, preset settings. You can customize, and you can also brand an app. Some apps that I've seen that have done some really cool things, such as Jamf Setup app and Jamf Reset. You can go as far as rebranding it. I'm not sure about that app specifically, but you can use AppConfig to totally rebrand an app specific to an organization. Meanwhile, as a developer, you only had to package one app and then let MDM admins kind of do with it what they want. You can change the content of the app, and then one thing that we found very useful, especially over the stay-at-home orders during COVID, which I might touch on a little bit later, is changing the functionality of an app. You can actually turn certain things on within the app itself so that users will be forced through a specific login tunnel, or you'll turn on SSO settings in specific areas. It can do all kinds of different things. It's just kind of a gambit of different things that you can do with AppConfig. So let me give you a scenario. Let's pretend that you're a K through 12 MDM admin, and the Curriculum and Instruction Department, or the CNI department, has just purchased a reading app. So in this instance, I'm going to use iRead because iRead supports AppConfig. So the requirements is that the app requires users to input a 9-digit site ID in order for the app to work specific to the organization. And the CNI department just needs this app to go out quick, and they've got about a week, and so you've got maybe thousands or hundreds of devices that you need to send this out to, and so the task can be quite difficult at hand. So this is what a typical workflow kind of looks like. And you notice it's a little jumbled. There's a lot that's going on. It's meant to look that way because there's a lot of communication pieces as well as documentation that needs to happen. But in the slides, I'm going to be starting at the top left with admin and IT. So basically what would happen is, as admin and IT, we would receive a task such as install an app from the Curriculum and Instruction Department. And we would figure out how the app needs to be distributed, whether it's going to go out through self-service or install automatically. We would document, oh, by the way, you need to go into settings. You need to set this site ID. It needs to be a specific way or else the app is not going to work. We then communicate that documentation down to the campus level. The campus level kind of communicates that down to the teachers. And now the teachers are communicating that down to the students. And again, whether we've installed automatically from self-service or now we're getting the students to pull the app from self-service, doesn't really matter. The main key thing is once the app is installed, two things can happen. Either A, the app does not work because the site ID was input incorrectly into settings. And so basically now when the students open it, it's something is supposed to happen, but it's not the right thing. We're not going to the right organization portal or something like that. And so it being a 9 or 12 digit or however many digit site ID that it might be, it's very specific. And so you have to make sure that you type it in specifically. And so what happens is that the teacher will end up submitting a ticket and will end up repeating the whole workflow all over again. And so it basically just costs time, and now we might not meet our deadline by the end of the week. So the alternative is that the app successfully installs, and it just so happened that our documentation was flawless and communication was flawless and everything worked out great. And unfortunately, as MDM admins, we all know that that's not always the case. So what's the solution? Well, luckily, like I said, iRead incorporates or implements managed app config. So what does that mean? Basically, what that means is, like I said, you're going to use a dictionary. You're going to use key value pairs. And what you're going to do is go into Jamf. You're going to go into mobile device apps. You're going to hop over to app configuration, and you're going to take those key value pairs, and you're going to change the site ID to something that might be specific for your organization. Now, I just want to pause there for a second before I continue because, again, this is a specific example to one specific app. But imagine that if we could use these same key value pairs to maybe change the colors of an app, to brand it towards, like Lubbock Cooper, for instance, we're red, white, and black. So we might input different things in these key value pairs into a specific app that accepts app config so that that app is branded specifically to our organization. Another thing is that we can change the functionality of the app, like you're seeing in this example, where now because we've input in a certain string or a certain Boolean value, basically this app is going to accept whatever we've sent in as the key value pair so that it's specific to our organization. So If you kind of look over there on the left side, I've shown in the slide that you can go into app configuration, plug in this key value pair, and then on the right side you can see after the app is installed that we have an MDM key that's been inputted. And so basically we're not relying on the users and on the teachers and the communication and the documentation to get all of this out. Basically the site ID is built right into the app. So now our workflow has changed a little bit. The main thing that's changed is that now we've got rid of the whole thing that sends us back through the whole cycle again. So we received the task as admin and IT. We've funneled that down into documentation of how we're going to have the app installed, either automatically or through self-service. We're going to go ahead and be nice, and we're going to build in the site ID so they don't even have to think about it. And then we're going to pass that down to the campus level, go through the whole workflow again. And basically, when we end with the workflow, we have an app that has successfully installed. And luckily, we don't have tickets firing off wondering what the site ID is. So that's just one kind of basic example of how you can use AppConfig in your organization. Again, I want you to kind of think creatively and think about there are many different vendors have different ways that they use AppConfig. One particular that we used was Zoom. Over the stay-at-home orders, we were kind of reluctant to use Zoom because there was a lot that was going on with Zoom, but we found that a lot of teachers and students were kind of using it anyways. And so luckily with AppConfig, Zoom provides us some key value pairs to where we could turn certain functionality off so that basically they had to log in through our portal and couldn't use their personal accounts. So that came in very, very handy, and it was all due because the Zoom developers had decided to implement or integrate AppConfig into their app. So how can you get started with AppConfig? I've got a couple things here for you. You can check out your vendor's website. Like I just said, I checked into iRead, I checked into Zoom, and I found that, oh, hey, they allow MDM admins to input a certain XML value to use AppConfig. So you can check out your vendor's websites. Sometimes it's documented, sometimes it's not. Another great resource is that you can go to the Jamf AppConfig generator. So you can use the link in these slides, or you can Google it. Basically, you're going to arrive at a place that's called the Jamf AppConfig generator. And what it's going to do is allow you to search what apps support AppConfig. And so what you can do is look up an app that that might support it. It's going to spit out all the things that you can do and personalize that app for your organization, or even all the way down to your user level. And then it's going to, once you kind of set all those presets, you're going to be able to export the XML values or the dictionary that you're going to then turn over into the Jamf Pro portal. So that is AppConfig kind of in a nutshell. Again, not really meant to be so much of a deep dive, but we do have some resources at the end of this presentation that we will be sharing with you. So now I'm going to push it off to Jamf Pro API, my friend Garrett.
All right, so I'm here to talk about the Jamf API. So first, I want to talk about some of the problems that we have run into during our deployments. So one is pre-assigning users to iPads. So during our summer or initial deployments, we needed a faster and a more efficient way to assign users to iPads, and not just users, but like inventory information, device names, the whole works. We have also needed ways to mass delete classes from Jamf. Another common use case is during pandemics or summer pickups, we needed ways to efficiently place multiple devices in the lost mode, as a lot of iPads sometimes get lost. And recently, we needed a new way to assign macOS devices in Jamf. So we wrote scripts to accomplish these tasks, and I'm going to explain how we did it. So our solution was integrating the Jamf REST API. And in doing so, it allowed us to automate and improve our workflows. So what exactly is the Jamf API? The Jamf API is a tool with Jamf that allows MDM admins like us to programmatically perform actions to the Jamf server, allows us to work with the objects in the Jamf server, such as mobile devices. It is commonly used with scripts and applications to help with these deployment issues. So the first thing that I like to tell people about the Jamf API is that there's two versions of it. There's the classic API and the Pro API. The classic API is the original API, while the Pro API is a newer one that's in beta. And the two big differences is how they handle payloads and how they handle authentication. So the classic API uses XML payloads, and the Pro API uses JSON payloads. And for people who may not know, a payload in layman's terms is just data that you send into the server. And we'll be seeing an example of a XML payload in a sec. And like I said, they handle authentication differently. So the classic API uses basic authentication, meaning your Jamf Pro credentials, while the Pro API allows you to use tokens. Us personally, as of now, we have stuck with the classic API because since the Pro API is still in development, there's still some features we're waiting on. But once those features get added, we hope to go full force into the Pro API as it does have better features like JSON and tokens. So some examples of applications that integrate the Jamf API, as I mentioned, there are applications that use it. One popular one that I'm sure a lot of MDM admins have heard of is the MUT. And of course, we use it like I'm sure a lot of other people do. Well, the MUT relies even on the Jamf API to perform the functions it does when you submit your data. And then I also programmed an application in Swift called Simply Assign. This was a inner-source project that I worked on over the summer to help make it easier to assign macOS devices to solve the issue that I mentioned earlier with it. So a couple of tools to help you get started, a couple of popular ones that I like to use is first is a REST API client known as Postman. And the big thing it allows you to do is you can send all sorts of requests back and forth to your Jamf server. So it's a good way to test your requests and make sure they're valid. Another very popular feature of Postman is once you send in those requests, you can generate code snippets for them, which is really useful if you're not too familiar with programming or working with networking libraries. You can kind of use that as a guide, or in some cases, just directly use it. Below that is just a regular good old text editor that I put down there, and the one I like to use is Visual Studio Code. There are many text editors out there, but Visual Studio Code is a very easy and popular choice, and it's what we use to create those scripts or applications to solve those problems. So real quick, I have two examples of API scripts. This isn't me like going over like the coding pieces, but more of just what it does, rather how it does it. So this is for a GET request, so just retrieving data. And essentially what it's doing is, first off, it's using the Python programming language. You can use pretty much any programming language for it, but I'm picking Python since those are the examples that Jamf uses. And essentially what it's doing is it's using Python's networking library to open a connection to the Jamf server, sending in the headers to the Jamf server that you need to perform the request, which is just basically metadata of your request. Then it opens that request to get the data that you need. That's what the get JSS resource line is. You're just saying, okay, I want to perform a GET request on this object. And then using the headers, using the payload, and using the type of request you want, it sends that resource, retrieves the response with 400, 500, 200, whatever it may be, processes it, and in this case, it outputs it to the screen. This is a put request, which put is for updating data rather than retrieving it. And it pretty much works just like the GET request. The only difference is we actually have a payload this time because I said earlier to update data to your Jamf server programmatically, you send in payloads. So for the payload there, you see a whole bunch of XML data, kind of like the XML code Green was talking about with AppConfig. You just provide that in there, and that's how it knows what field you want to update. The Jamf API documentation has the models listed on how to find what data you want to update, because it basically matches what you would see in the Jamf user interface.
Okay, so thank you, Garrett. Appreciate you joining me on this presentation and talking through the Jamf Pro API. So like I was saying, it's not going to be a real deep dive on how you can use Jamf Pro API and how you can use AppConfig as far as like a real high level or low level, whatever you have it be. So it was more or less just to kind of communicate what we have used and what we've found success for using in our organization. And I think that it's useful for whatever organization you might be in, whether it's healthcare or it's K through 12 or it's enterprise or a small business, whatever it might be. These are tools that I think that are very useful for any Jamf admin or any kind of Apple admin. And so some resources that we would like to leave you with is the Jamf developer portal. That's a great place to go and plug in and just kind of figure out what all you can do with Jamf. It's a great place for you to kind of dabble a little bit into the API, and you don't have to worry about messing up your environment. And in fact, you can't really mess up the environment that's there. So it's meant to be there to be used and to be to try things out with. And so Garrett had also mentioned Postman. That's one of my favorite tools that I love to use as well. So you can use Jamf developer portal. You can play around with Postman and kind of just play around with the different APIs, as well as other things that are there in the developer portal to learn. Another place is the Jamf Marketplace. So the Jamf Marketplace has a bunch of tools, a bunch of apps, a bunch of different things that you can incorporate into your environment. One of those apps that we've found a significant amount of use from is the Mutt. That's in the Marketplace. There's also tools like Nomad, which is great for our Mac OS fleet. But anyways, there's a lot of great tools that you can learn from in the Marketplace and use in your environment. And then also, if you scan the QR code that I've got there on the right, it's going to take you to a Google Drive folder where you can actually reference kind of a deep dive that I've done with the Google Doc, going over AppConfig, kind of going a little bit more in detail than what we went into today of how specifically it's used, and so how you can get started with it in your organization. But another thing that I'll be adding periodically to that that Google Doc is for app developers on how to use it. So forewarning, I'm not an app developer by trade, but I can dabble a little bit, and I figured out how to use Swift and Swift UI on how to incorporate AppConfig. So if that's something that's of interest and you're an app developer, or you've been interested, or you see some of the upside from AppConfig, he's used it in his Simply Assign tool that he mentioned. And so it does some really wonderful things, both from a aesthetics appeal, from branding, all the way up to like just customization and functionality. You can totally revamp how the app works without having to repackage it for each organization. So that Google Doc goes into a much deeper dive that I could not explain in just 30 minutes in a session, as well as that Google Drive folder also includes a link to our slides in PDF form. So you can reference those if you find that those are helpful. Feel free to reach out to us in the presenter information. We'll be happy to help you as best that we can getting started with AppConfig or with Jamf Pro API. There are numerous tools that are out there, and there's tons of tools that are very, very useful, but these are the ones that stuck out to us that have been very, very useful and have helped us with our efficiency and our effectiveness in our MDM environment and through our K-12 environment. From a user's perspective all the way up to the admin's perspective, everybody's been benefited. Everybody's had their workflows done a little bit more efficiently and effectively, which is something that Garrett and I are very, very passionate about. So, and with that, that concludes our session. We appreciate you joining us for this session. We hope that you learned something maybe new. Maybe it's something that you hadn't heard of before, or maybe it's something that you just need a refresher on. We hope that this session was helpful to you. We hope to hear from you if you have any questions. We really want to help push these two things along so that we can champion these things for Jamf and for Apple.